Patrick Ewing spent 11 years building a case that he was the most dominant force in the Eastern Conference, and on the night of May 25, 1993, he walked into Madison Square Garden believing he had finally assembled enough evidence to close the argument. It was Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals, a Tuesday night in New York, and the Garden was operating at a frequency that went beyond ordinary crowd noise into something closer to pressure, a physical thing you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. The floor had been buffed to the kind of shine that makes the ball look like it's flying when it bounces, and the air inside that building carried the particular charge of a city that had been waiting its entire adult life for a moment it had decided was finally, irreversibly, arriving. The Knicks were up 3-2 in the series. One win separated Patrick Ewing from the NBA Finals, and the entire island of Manhattan had decided to be present for the closing of that distance. What Patrick Ewing did not fully account for, not in the way it needed to be accounted for, was the specific quality of the thing waiting for him on the other side of the floor. Ewing in the spring of 1993 was playing the best basketball of his career and building toward what his supporters described as his destiny and what his critics described as his best remaining chance. He was averaging over 24 points and 11 rebounds in the series, numbers that made the statistical argument for his dominance plainly and irrefutably. He had spent a decade in New York absorbing the singular pressure of being the player a franchise believed it had purchased deliverance from, and he had converted that pressure not into collapse but into something harder, something that looked like obligation wearing the uniform of excellence. His post-game was a controlled system of force and angles. His hook shot a masterpiece of ugly efficiency that looked wrong from every camera angle and went in anyway, with the stubborn frequency of something that does not require beauty to be effective. He had been to the finals once in 1994, would go again, but this series, this night, felt to him and to the city like the one that was supposed to define the account. He was not just trying to win a basketball game. He was trying to settle a decade-long argument about what kind of player he was and whether greatness could be achieved through will alone when the particular instrument of that will was measured against the instruments of others. The Bulls had come into this series as the defending champions, 2 years of championship rings, and the specific kind of confidence that only comes from having already been where everyone else is trying to get to. But they were also, in the analysis of some observers, a team in a quiet transition. Horace Grant was a year away from leaving. The supporting cast was deep, but not yet fully remade. And Jordan was Jordan, which in the spring of 1993 meant something so large it was almost impossible to carry as a single idea. 32 points per game in the postseason. A man who had been to 2 consecutive finals and won both. A man who understood the architecture of a close playoff series the way a surgeon understands a procedure. He has performed so many times that his hands know the sequence before his mind has named it. Phil Jackson sat in the visiting locker room before Game 5 and told his team, in the particular tone he reserved for moments when he wanted words to land like weight rather than sound, that the Garden crowd would try to become the 6th man, and that the only answer to a 6th man was to make the building go quiet early, and that the only person in the room who was built to make 20,000 New Yorkers go quiet was already lacing his sneakers in the corner and did not need to be told what the night required. Jordan taped his wrists in silence. He did not look up during the pre-game talk. He was already somewhere else. His teammates had learned, over the course of 4 years and 2 championships, that this specific quality of absence before a game meant something was coming. Pippen recognized it. Grant recognized it. Even the rookies who had been around long enough knew that when Jordan went still before a big game, the stillness was not peace. It was compression. This is the night that ended one man's story and continued another's. The series before Game 5 had been everything the Garden crowd wanted and everything the Bulls respected. The Knicks played a brand of basketball that was less a philosophy than a physical argument. Stop the ball, contest every catch, make every possession feel like a negotiation conducted in a language of forearms and set screens and defensive rotations that arrived precisely on time and with maximum force. Pat Riley had built a team in his own image, which meant a team that believed suffering was a competitive advantage, that if you could make the game ugly enough for long enough, Eventually, the opponent's will would corrode before yours did. It was not elegant basketball. It was effective basketball, and in the spring of 1993, it had been effective enough to take a 3-2 series lead against the team that had won 57 games in the regular season and owned every championship memory the decade had produced so far. The first quarter of Game 5 was everything the Garden wanted it to be. The crowd was at a volume that made communication on the floor genuinely difficult, where you could see players shouting at each other from 3 feet away and neither one fully hearing the words. The Knicks came out physical and organized, running their defensive system with the disciplined fury of a team that understood it was one good half away from an NBA Finals appearance. And the Bulls struggled in the first 6 minutes to find the rhythm of their offense against a defense that seemed designed specifically to remove rhythm from the available options. Jordan had 8 points at the end of the first quarter. This was not nothing, but it was also not what the building feared, and the Garden faithful understood the difference and raised their volume accordingly. Ewing posted up twice in the first quarter and scored both times. He stood near the top of the key after the second basket with his hands on his hips, in the posture of a man who has confirmed something he already suspected, and the crowd matched his confidence with their own. And for approximately 11 minutes that Tuesday night in May, it was possible to construct a version of the story where the argument was going to be settled exactly the way Patrick Ewing had always believed it would be. Jordan saw all of this, he filed all of it, he made no expression. The first sign of what was coming arrived midway through the second quarter, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small events that individually meant almost nothing and collectively meant everything. Jordan received a pass on the right wing with John Starks fighting over a screen to contest, and instead of shooting the open jumper he had taken and made 100 times in situations exactly like this one, he held the ball for a fraction of a second longer than normal, and that fraction of a second was enough to make Starks overcommit to the closeout, and Jordan drove past him into the lane with a change of direction so sudden and so complete that Starks's momentum carried him 3 steps in the wrong direction, and there was nothing anyone could do about what happened at the rim. And Jordan made the shot, and then turned back on defense without any acknowledgement of what he had just done, which was not modesty but something closer to the opposite of modesty, the complete absence of surprise. Jordan was not yet hurting the Knicks. He was introducing himself to the evening. By the half, Jordan had 20 points and the Bulls trailed by 2, and the locker room at halftime in the Garden had the texture of a building that had not yet decided what it was going to become. Phil Jackson said very little. He drew 1 play on the whiteboard and tapped it twice with the marker, and told his team that the third quarter was where the series was going to be won or lost, not because of any strategic reason, but because of a more fundamental truth about how basketball games at this level actually worked. The team that decided first to stop absorbing the opponent's energy and start producing its own was the team that went to the finals. Jordan sat in the corner with a towel over his head for most of the halftime period. His breathing was even. His eyes, when they were visible, had the quality of light in a room where something is being built. Here is what Patrick Ewing understood about Michael Jordan in the spring of 1993, which was everything that was publicly available to understand, and here is what Patrick Ewing did not yet fully understand, which was what all of that information felt like when it was directed specifically, personally, and with complete focus at you. The third quarter opened with a Jordan crossover at the top of the key against Derek Harper. That was not the fastest crossover anyone in that building had ever seen. What it was, precisely, was the exact crossover required by the specific defensive position Harper occupied at that specific moment, which meant it was not a display of athleticism, but something more unsettling. A display of calculation executing itself at the speed of athleticism. Harper went left. Jordan was already right. The layup was made before the recovery was possible, and the crowd, which had been a wall of noise for 36 minutes, made a sound that was not silence exactly, but was the first vibration of something that might become silence if it were allowed to continue. Jordan had 24 points with 9 minutes left in the third quarter. Ewing called for the ball on the next possession and scored. The crowd restored itself. The game continued. The Knicks made their rotations and their defensive stops, and executed their offensive system with the conviction of a team that believed in its own identity. And for 2 minutes the game was a basketball game again, in the way it had been before the third quarter began, contested and uncertain and open on both sides. Then Jordan came off a screen at the elbow, caught the ball with 2 feet of separation, and shot a pull-up jumper over Ewing's closing hand. The timing of the shot was so precisely calibrated to the geometry of Ewing's closeout that there was no possible adjustment Ewing could have made that would have changed the outcome. He was in the right position. He executed the right technique. He closed with the right speed. The shot went in anyway. This is the specific quality of Jordan at this level of focus that made opponents eventually stop looking for the adjustments they could make and begin sitting with the understanding that there were no adjustments. There was only the game continuing and Jordan continuing with it, and at some point those two things were not separate ideas. Jordan finished the third quarter with 31 points. The Bulls led by 7. The Garden, which had been the 6th man for 36 minutes, was in the process of becoming something else. It happened in the fourth quarter, and it happened not in a single instant, but in a sequence of 3 consecutive possessions that in retrospect form a single idea. The first was a Jordan mid-range jumper from the left side, with Charles Oakley in his face. A shot taken before Oakley had fully arrived, but late enough to make the contest a real one. And the ball went in off the back of the rim with the unmistakable sound of a shot that has been made by someone who is currently deciding the pace and temperature of the game, independently of what the defense is doing. The second was a drive that split the Knicks' defensive rotation in a way that should not have been geometrically available. A gap that opened because Jordan had already committed to going through it before it appeared. And the layup that finished the play was made with the right hand when the angle of the drive demanded the left, a choice so difficult that Ewing, who stood at the help position with his hands raised, turned his head slightly to follow the ball's trajectory in a way that was not a basketball move but something involuntary. The third was a pull-up jumper over John Starks at the top of the key, and it was this one, this particular shot, this specific geometry, that settled something in the building. Because Starks had done everything right. He had not been beaten by a faster player. He had not been outmuscled. He had guarded the ball, contested the dribble, stayed in front through 2 crossovers, and arrived at the moment of the shot with his hand up and his feet set and everything his training and his preparation had built him to provide. And Jordan shot over all of it, not through it, over it. As if the sum of everything Starks had offered was an interesting problem that required a slightly higher release point. Starks stood with his hand in the air after the ball went through the net, and he held it there for 1 beat longer than the play required, and in that extra beat, in that small excess of stillness, the entire meaning of the night was visible. He was not a player who had failed. He was a player who had played well and been answered by something that did not operate inside the ordinary grammar of the game. Ewing watched this from 20 feet away. He said nothing. He was doing arithmetic. The arithmetic was not about the score, though the score was now 11 in favor of the Bulls with 4 minutes left and climbing. It was the other arithmetic, the harder one, the one where you add up everything you are and everything you have built and everything you have survived and everything the city believes you capable of, and you measure it against what is happening on the other side of the court, and the answer you get is not what you expected. Jordan finished with 54 points. 54 points in Madison Square Garden, in a game that eliminated the Knicks from the playoffs. He made 20 of 26 shots. He made 14 of 15 free throws. He did these things against a defense that was specifically constructed to stop him, coached by one of the most tactically sophisticated minds in the history of the sport, powered by the loudest crowd in basketball. Ewing's post-game locker room was quiet, in the way only a locker room that has been expecting to celebrate can be quiet. He sat at his stall and answered the reporters' questions with the compressed dignity of a man who understood that the most honest thing he could say was also the simplest. He said Jordan was the best player he had ever competed against. He said the Knicks would be back. He said these things without looking up from the carpet, which was red, and he said them in the specific tone of a man who is not telling reporters what he believes, but is instead working out, in real time, how to carry a weight he had not expected to be carrying tonight. He had known Jordan was great. He had known the numbers. He had prepared for the numbers, prepared for the athleticism, prepared for the competitive will. He was not prepared for the experience of being inside a game with Jordan when Jordan had decided the game was his, which was a different and more complete thing than any statistic could describe, and which could not be studied on film or accounted for in a defensive scheme because it was not a technical quality, but a total quality. The difference between a player who competes within a game and a player who contains the game within himself. Jordan dressed quickly in the visitors' locker room. He spoke to a few reporters politely and briefly and said the kind of things you say when a team has won an important game and you are already thinking about the next one. He did not linger on 54 points. He did not linger on anything. Pippen, dressing at the adjacent stall, watched Jordan zip his bag and said quietly to no one in particular that he had never once in 4 years seen Michael stay in a moment longer than the moment required. Jordan was already thinking about Game 6. Patrick Ewing would play 12 more years in the NBA. He would be selected for multiple All-Star teams and accumulate statistics that secured his place among the elite centers of his generation and earned him, eventually, a bust in Springfield. He would reach the finals in 1994 and come within a single possession of winning it. He built a career that any reasonable accounting of basketball history had to take seriously and reward with its respect. But the specific weight of May 25, 1993, was something that moved with him. Not as a scar that reopened, but as a measurement he carried in his body, a permanent internal reference for what it felt like to prepare correctly, compete fully, receive everything the city had to give you, and still come to the end of the night standing in front of a scoreboard that said 54 and could not be argued with. The Garden emptied slowly that night. New York crowds always empty slowly after losses, as if leaving faster would make the loss more permanent, and the people who walked down 7th Avenue after midnight were quiet in the way that cities are quiet, when something they needed to be true has turned out to be something else. They would have other chances. The game would be played again. But the specific version of the story, where Patrick Ewing walked into Game 5 of the 1993 Eastern Conference Finals and came out on the other side of it as the player who had ended the Bulls' dynasty, that version was closed now, filed away, available only as a parallel history that had been adjacent to the real one before the evening made its selection. What Jordan did to Patrick Ewing in the Garden that night was not simply basketball superiority. It was the expression of a specific philosophy about what performance at the highest level actually requires, which is not the willingness to try harder than the opponent, but the willingness to have already tried harder than the opponent for every day of the years that preceded the night, so that when the night arrives and the crowd is at its peak and the opponent is at his best, and everything the moment can produce is being produced, you are not in competition with the moment. You are already ahead of it. The moment is trying to catch up to you. That is the distance Jordan maintained, not by talent alone, because talent was common enough at that level that it could not by itself explain the gap. He maintained it by obsession, by the specific refusal to allow any period of comfort to become a period of rest, by treating every instance of being underestimated as a withdrawal from the account he kept in the place where other people stored their satisfaction, an account he spent his entire career refusing to let reach zero. He was never satisfied. He understood in a way that is almost impossible to sustain, and that very few human beings have ever managed, that satisfaction is the beginning of decline. That the moment you allow yourself to feel that you have arrived is the moment you start the process of becoming someone else's story. Ewing arrived. Jordan never did. That is not a failure of ambition. It is the specific and merciless nature of what Jordan chose to be, and the price of that choice, which he paid with every hour he spent in a gym when no one was watching, and which everyone else paid whenever they stood across the court from him and mistook proximity for equivalence. The lesson is not that talent wins. The lesson is not even that work wins. The lesson is this: the people who change what is possible are the ones who refuse to accept the distance between what they are and what they want to be as a fixed and permanent measurement, who treat that distance instead as a fuel source, who wake up every morning and feed the fire, and who understand that the fire is not a means to an end, but the thing itself, the whole point, the only honest answer to the question of what a life spent in pursuit of something actually looks like from the inside. You do not become unreachable by arriving. You become unreachable by never stopping.